Rethinking race in medical testing towards equitable healthcare. In the complex world of medicine, we've long relied on various tests and risk assessment tools to guide our healthcare decisions. But what if some of these tools are perpetuating racial inequalities? This video dives into a critical issue facing modern medicine: the use of race in medical testing and risk assessment. We'll explore how race has been factored into tests across multiple medical fields, from kidney function and obstetrics to cancer risk and cardiovascular health. We'll look at specific examples in areas like pulmonary function, osteoporosis screening, diabetes management, and even pain assessment. But here's the kicker. While these race-based adjustments were intended to improve accuracy, they've often led to healthcare inequities. We'll break down how these disparities occur and why they're problematic. The good news? The medical community is waking up to this issue. We'll discuss the growing movement to develop new, more equitable tools that don't rely on broad racial categories. We'll explore the concept of culturally competent healthcare and why it's crucial for achieving true health equality. We'll also touch on the importance of diverse, inclusive medical research and how it can lead to better outcomes for all patients. Finally, we'll look at what healthcare providers and patients alike can do to advocate for more personalized, fair approaches to medical testing and risk assessment. Join us as we unpack this complex issue and explore how medicine is evolving to provide better, more equitable care for everyone, regardless of race. It's time to rethink how we approach healthcare, because everyone deserves the best possible medical care.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Are you ready to dig into something really interesting today?
Absolutely. I'm excited to see where this conversation takes us.
We're going to be talking about vitamin D, specifically its relationship with race and how that plays into medical assessments and treatment. It's a pretty fascinating area with some real head-scratching findings.
Yeah, it's one of those things you think you have a handle on, and then you start digging a little deeper and you realize there's a lot more to the story.
Exactly. So we're going to unpack all of that today. We're going to be looking at a recent clinical trial that really challenges some common assumptions, and we're also going to be drawing on a document that takes a broader look at how race is used in medical assessments.
Sounds good. Let's dive in.
Let's do it. So let's start with the basics. We often hear that Black Americans tend to have lower levels of vitamin D compared to white Americans, right?
Right. We see this pattern consistently in the research. When we look at something called 25-hydroxyvitamin D, or 25-OHD for short, which is the primary marker we use to assess vitamin D status.
Okay, so 25-OHD, that's how we measure vitamin D levels in the body.
Exactly. It's a more accurate reflection of vitamin D stores than just looking at dietary intake, for instance.
And this difference in levels between Black and white Americans, it's usually attributed to differences in skin pigmentation, right? Darker skin produces less vitamin D from sunlight exposure.
That's definitely a contributing factor. You're talking about cutaneous biosynthesis, which is just a fancy way of saying vitamin D production from sunlight. And it's true that melanin, the pigment that gives skin its color, does absorb some UV radiation, which is needed for vitamin D production.
But that can't be the whole story, right? I mean, if lower vitamin D levels always led to negative health outcomes, you'd expect to see a higher prevalence of certain conditions in Black Americans, and that's not always the case.
You're hitting on a crucial point here. There's a bit of a paradox at play. While it's true that Black Americans tend to have lower total 25-OHD levels, they don't necessarily experience the health consequences you might expect based on those levels alone.
So what are we missing here? Is there something else going on?
That's what we're going to unpack. To really understand this, we need to go a little deeper into how vitamin D actually works in the body.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's go deeper.
So it's not just about the total amount of vitamin D in your blood. It's about how much of it is actually available to your cells.
Available, meaning?
Meaning not bound to proteins. See, most of the 25-OHD in our bloodstream is actually bound to a protein called vitamin D binding protein, or DBP. Only a small fraction of it is unbound or free, and it's that free 25-OHD that's biologically active that's the stuff that your body can actually use.
Hold on, so you're saying that even if someone has lower total vitamin D levels, they could still have enough free, usable vitamin D if their DBP is different?
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting because research suggests that there might be variations in DBP levels and how it interacts with vitamin D among different racial groups.
Wait, are you saying that someone's race could actually influence how much free vitamin D their body has access to?
That's what some studies are
Oh.
suggesting, and that leads us to this fascinating clinical trial that we're going to dive into next.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Let's hear about this clinical trial. Okay, spill the tea. What did they find in this trial?
So this study, it was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, really well-respected journal, and they basically recruited over 1,000 healthy adults, men and women, black and white, a good mix. And they wanted to look at this whole free 25 OHD thing directly.
So they actually measured the free vitamin D levels in the participants?
They did, and this is key, because most studies just look at total 25 OHD,
Yeah.
but what they found was fascinating. Even though, as expected, the black participants had lower total vitamin D levels at baseline, when they started the study.
Right.
The ratio of free to total 25 OHD was basically the same as the white participants.
So even though their total levels were different, their bodies were using the vitamin D they had in similar ways.
Exactly. It suggests that just looking at that total number might not tell the whole story,
Yeah.
especially when we're considering different racial groups.
That's so interesting. Okay, so they measured the levels at the start of the study. What happened next?
Well, they didn't stop there. They then gave all the participants vitamin D supplements every day for 12 weeks. And they wanted to see how each group would respond. Would there be differences based on those initial vitamin D levels?
And we're there.
That's the really fascinating part. Both the black and white participants, they showed pretty much the same response to the supplementation.
Wow. So regardless of their starting point, everyone benefited from the extra vitamin D in a similar way.
It seems that way, which really calls into question some of those assumptions we've been making about vitamin D and race. Those cutoffs doctors use to decide if someone is deficient, those are often based on studies that were done in predominantly white populations.
So you're saying those cutoffs might not be accurate for everyone?
That's the question, isn't it? If free NR5-OHD is the more important measure when it comes to actual vitamin D status, and that's what this study suggests, then maybe, just maybe, we need to rethink those cutoffs. And we need to make sure they're appropriate for all racial and ethnic groups.
That makes a lot of sense. We can't just assume that one size fits all when it comes to health and medicine.
Precisely. It's about moving towards more personalized approaches
Yeah.
and recognizing the diversity within these racial categories.
This is what I love about these deep dives. We start with one question about vitamin D, and suddenly we're questioning the very foundations of medical practice.
It's all connected. And this example with vitamin D, it really highlights a much broader issue in medicine today, which is how we use race and ethnicity in medical assessments.
Right, because race is a social construct, not a biological one, and yet we see it used in all sorts of medical contexts.
We do. It's in how we assess kidney function, how we screen for certain diseases, even how we interpret genetic tests.
It's almost like we're trying to fit square pegs into round holes,
Right.
trying to force this concept of race onto something as complex and nuanced as human biology.
It's about trying to find that balance between acknowledging the role that race can play in health disparities,
Yeah.
while also recognizing its limitations and the potential harms of oversimplification.
It's a tightrope walk, for sure. And speaking of this whole issue of race in medicine, our other source for today's deep dive really digs into this. It looks at how race is used in medical assessments and the potential consequences.
Yes, this document really gets into the weeds of how these race-based adjustments came to be, and it highlights some of the major concerns with their continued use.
Like what? Give me an example. I'm really curious to hear about the specific ways this plays out in medicine.
Let's take kidney function, for example. For years, doctors used a calculation called EGFR to estimate how well someone's kidneys are filtering waste. And this calculation, it actually included race as a factor.
Wait, really? They factored race into determining someone's kidney function?
They did, and the assumption was that black patients inherently had different kidney function than white patients, even at the same level of measured kidney function.
That's wild. And what are the implications of that? So they factored race into determining someone's kidney function.
Yeah, and this is only recently that this practice has been seriously challenged. Many are now advocating for what we call race-neutral EGFR calculations,
Race neutral meaning.
meaning they don't factor in race at all. Because using race in this way, it can have some pretty significant consequences.
Okay. Such as?
Well, for one, it could actually delay a black patient's access to a kidney transplant.
Wait, really? How so?
Because if the calculation is overestimating their kidney function based on their race, It might look like they don't need a transplant as urgently as a white patient with the same underlying kidney health. That's just one example, but it highlights the potential for real harm.
That's incredibly concerning. So are you saying there's now a push to completely eliminate the use of race in these kinds of medical assessments?
There's definitely a growing awareness of the problems with race-based adjustments and a push to rethink how they're used. Some experts believe we should eliminate them altogether. Others are looking for more nuanced approaches.
So it's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Exactly. There are valid arguments on both sides. Some people worry that if we remove race from these assessments completely, we might miss important information about health disparities.
Because certain groups might be more susceptible to certain conditions due to a combination of genetic and environmental factors.
Right. But then on the other hand, using race as a shortcut, without really understanding the nuances well, that can reinforce harmful stereotypes and lead to inaccurate diagnoses or treatments.
It's a delicate balance for sure. You have to weigh the potential benefits against the potential harms.
And that's what makes this conversation so important. We need to be having these discussions openly and honestly to figure out the best way forward.
Absolutely. So what are some of the potential harms of relying too heavily on these race-based adjustments? We've talked about the kidney transplant example. What else?
Well, one concern is that they can actually perpetuate the very health disparities we're trying to address.
How so?
Well, let's say a test underestimates the risk for a certain racial group because of a race adjustment. Those individuals might not get the screenings or treatments they need because it appears their risk is lower when it might not actually be.
It's like we're assuming everyone within a racial category is the same, when in reality there's so much variation within those groups.
That's exactly it. It's reductive and potentially dangerous to make assumptions based solely on race.
And it ignores the fact that race is a social construct, not a precise biological category.
Right. It's more about shared experiences and environmental factors than it is about genetics. So using it as a shortcut in medicine, it could actually mask the real individual risk factors someone has.
It's like we're looking at one piece of the puzzle and ignoring the rest of the picture.
Precisely. And that can have real consequences.
Yeah.
Think about something like genetic testing. If we overemphasize certain gene variants as being more common in one racial group, we might miss those same variants in people from other groups.
Because we're not even looking for them.
Exactly.
Mm.
Or, conversely, we might overestimate risk in people who do have those variants simply because of their race, when in reality, their individual risk might be much lower based on other factors.
It's like we're letting our biases cloud our judgment, even in medicine.
And that's the danger. We have to be so careful about how we use race in these contexts, because we're talking about people's health, their lives even. It's not something to be taken lightly.
It's a lot of responsibility. And it sounds like we're at a crossroads in medicine. Where do you see this conversation heading? Are we going to ditch race completely or try to find some sort of middle ground?
It's a tough question. On the one hand, completely removing race from medical assessments could mean losing valuable information that helps us understand and address health disparities. But on the other hand, using it carelessly or without a deep understanding of its complexities, well, that can reinforce the very biases we're trying to overcome.
It's about finding that sweet spot where we're using all the tools at our disposal responsibly and ethically.
Exactly. It's not as simple as just checking a box. We need to be more thoughtful about how and when we use race, and always be aware of the potential pitfalls.
It's about moving towards a more individualized approach to healthcare, wouldn't you say?
Precisely. And the exciting thing is that the medical community is having these conversations.
Yeah.
We're starting to see a real shift towards personalized medicine, which has incredible potential to revolutionize how we approach healthcare.
Personalized medicine. Now, that's something I want to hear more about. It sounds like the future of healthcare.
It really is about shifting away from these broad categories like race and focusing more on individual biological and environmental factors.
Instead of assuming everyone within a certain race will respond the same way to a treatment, we can use a person's unique genetic information, lifestyle factors, even data from wearable technology to create more targeted, effective, and personalized interventions.
Exactly. It's about looking at the whole person, not just their race or ethnicity.
I can see how that would lead to better outcomes for everyone.
Absolutely. It's about moving away from those one-size-fits-all approaches.
Yeah.
And recognizing that each person is unique and their health should be treated as such.
This deep dive has been quite a journey. We've gone from the science of vitamin D and DBP to the complexities of race-based adjustments, all the way to the future of personalized medicine. It's amazing how interconnected these issues are.
It's all part of the same conversation. A conversation about how we can create a more equitable and effective healthcare system for everyone.
And that's a conversation worth having. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive today. It's been enlightening. And to everyone listening, if this has sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to keep digging.
Hmm.
Read those studies, ask your doctor questions, be an advocate for your own health. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those tough questions.